Hey, good afternoon again, everyone, and welcome to our webinar. And before we begin, please note that your participation in this event means granting ACELT and the British Council your permission to be part of the following: the recording of this event, photos and videos that may be used in ACELT's official website, social media platforms, and the ACELT forum, and other ACELT-initiated research and publications. Please feel free to leave the room if you do not wish to give us your consent. Thank you so much. Okay, so before we begin officially, may we ask Sir Mike to lead the prayer?
Thank you, Ms. Cheche. Good afternoon, everyone. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit, we thank you, Lord, for gathering us here today to learn from each other so we can be better teachers for our learners. We thank you for the gift of knowledge and experience that you have bestowed to our panelists and for their generosity to share this with us all. We ask for your blessings to keep us all safe and healthy so we can continue to do our mission to educate the children and youth of the Philippines. We bring this all up to you in your great glory. Amen. Father, Son,
Amen.
Holy Spirit. Amen.
Amen. Good afternoon again, everyone, and welcome to the second of the 3 webinars in this series brought to you by the Ateneo Center for English Language Teaching and the British Council. You might want to greet everyone in your own language. Please use the chat box. I can see greetings in English, but what about in your own language or languages? Go ahead, please greet us. Magandang hapon, maayong hapon. Yes. Maayong hapon sa tanan, mabuhay, naimbag nga adlaw, kada kayo amin, maayong adlaw, maayong hapon, mayap agat na panon. Magandang hapon po sa lahat. So this webinar series is titled How Language Assessment Works, Unpacking the CEFR in the Context of Teaching English in Multilingual Settings. And this is part of ASELT's mission to provide the standards, to upgrade the standards in English language and literature education in the country and its neighboring countries by providing basic and higher education teachers, teacher trainers, and school leaders with programs that are based on contextualized approaches to English language teaching, which are anchored on current pedagogical issues and developments in the use of English in the country and the region. This second of the 3 webinars focuses on language assessment in basic education, and this will be discussed in the context of CEFR. For this webinar, we have 2 objectives. First is, of course, to engage our basic education teachers in a timely discussion on assessing multilingual learners, and then to help language educators in general and school administrators to better understand the role of the Common European Framework of Reference for Languages in light of assessment. I'm Cecilia A. Suarez, or Cheche, Executive Director of the Ateneo Center for English Language Teaching, and I'm your moderator and also a panel member in today's webinar. With me are 2 well-respected educators in the country and outside. I will introduce each of them before their respective turns. So, our first panel member, resource person, is Mr. Andy Milner. Andy has been teaching or has been involved in teaching English for over 30 years, and he has worked in 7 different countries in Europe, the Middle East, North Africa, and Asia. Most of his career has been with the British Council as an academic manager, but he has also trained teachers, taught a wide range of courses, and worked as an examiner. As well as an initial certificate in teaching English, Andy has 2 postgraduate diplomas, one in teaching English as a foreign language and one in educational management in TESOL. His areas of expertise are English for adults and high school, academic English, professional English, and exam preparation. Andy currently works as the academic support manager for the British Council's East Asia exams teams, advising on the connections between teaching, learning, and assessment. So, everyone, please help me welcome Mr. Andy Milner to talk about how language assessment works, focus on basic education. Sir Andy?
Thank you, Cheche, and hello, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here with you. I am not sure I have a lot of time, so if you don't mind, I'm going to go straight into the presentation. And I hope you can see my slide there. Cheche is nodding, so thank you, Cheche. Okay, right. So I'm going to talk to you about how language assessment works. I will try to focus on basic education where I can, but I'm going to invite you to consider the concepts I'm describing in your context at certain stages through the presentation. So you may want to have a piece of paper and a pencil ready just to note down any ideas that you have. Okay, so what I hope to achieve in this session with you is basically to boost your language assessment literacy. Why? Well, it's to improve your general knowledge about language education from the aspect of assessment. I want to help you differentiate between different types of assessment and why we use them. We'll talk about the features of a good test or exam. I will discuss briefly the contributions of the CFR in improving assessment standards throughout the world, not just in Europe. I'm going to also try to get to the classroom to show how assessment can impact positively. So we'll be looking at what's called formative assessment or assessment for learning. And finally, I'll provide some links throughout the presentation. You'll see some QR codes. So if you're on a PC, you'll be able to use your phone to save the links. And if not, I'll share a PDF version of the presentation afterwards where you'll be able to follow the links. Okay, so let's begin at the beginning. What is assessment? Well, in the context of language teaching and learning, assessment refers to the act of collecting information and making judgments about a language learner's knowledge of a language and their ability to use it. So if we summarize, it's collecting information, it's making an evaluation, and then making a decision. So that's pretty much it. But as we will see, there are many, many angles that we can look at this. But before we do, let's just take a moment to consider how important it is. We live in a world which is globalized, and we live in a world where standards are becoming internationalized as well. This is true in the field of education, in employment, migration, and citizenship in other countries. So very often we are asked to demonstrate our ability in a language in order to take a course at a university, get a job, move to another country, or become a member of a new community. So it's clear that throughout the world, more people are taking language tests and more decisions are being taken based on those tests and the evidence of test scores. So just generally, assessment is important and international standards are increasing in importance. So I'd just like you to pause for a moment. And if you want to put something in the chat, you can, or in the Q&A, but in the chat, how do you feel about assessment? Are you okay with it? You just do it, get on with it, or do you try to avoid it? And while you're thinking about yourself, maybe think about your students and how your students feel about being assessed. Okay, you can carry on doing that if you want, but I'm going to move on because of the time. And I'm going to just briefly talk about some research that was conducted into attitudes, practices, and perspectives amongst teachers about assessment. And these were English teachers. And this research demonstrated that, and it was nothing new because other researchers have also found this, teachers tend to get very little training in assessment. And what's more, even when they've started teaching, they're not very interested in the theory underpinning assessment. And I myself am guilty of this. I went for many years avoiding, learning more about assessment. I thought it was very, very boring. Of course, now I find it completely fascinating. But one of the interesting things from this research is that without this training or without this interest, teachers tend to assess their students in the ways that they are used to, the ways that they were brought up, the way that they were schooled, the way that they were tested and evaluated by their own teachers. Or they just pick up things from their colleagues in the staff room in a bit by bit fragmentary process. So it's kind of an incomplete or unconsidered approach to assessment, shall we say. So why would it be important to understand literacy more? Well, let's begin with a question, which is, how much time do you think that you spend on assessment-related activity? Yeah, so in a working week or month, what percentage of your working time do you think you are assessing your students or doing something related to assessment? Marking essays, filling out reports, marking tests, or creating tests, or thinking of questions for tests. You might be surprised because according to one researcher, when they looked at every aspect of assessment, it could be anywhere between 25%, 35% of working time of teachers is related to assessment activities. Quite a lot, yeah? So there's one good reason to understand it better. It makes up a significant part of our jobs. Now, here are some other reasons why we want to be literate. And this is basically for our students. We want to make sure that we're assessing things in the right way and we're assessing the right things. We want to be sure that we're giving accurate grades and useful feedback. We want to make sure that our students are being treated fairly. And we also want to make sure that we're assessing in a way that is optimizing our teaching and learning, and that is not getting in the way of students' learning. This is because assessment always has an impact, what we call washback, in that the way we assess affects the way that our students learn, what they learn, and what for. Okay, so it's not all bad. We also have a lot of benefits in learning more about assessment. The first of which is efficiency and effectiveness. And this means, well, what I mean by this is it could save you time. If you know what you're doing, if you know how to do it, and if you know you've got a good idea, it should make it easier for you to assess your learners efficiently and effectively. Plus, of course, you won't get accused by your students of being unfair. No one's going to question your results from the tests. But ultimately, the benefits are that you'll be giving your learners better feedback for them to improve, and the assessments should give you feedback on what you can do next in your lesson plans, in your teaching, what your students need to focus on more. So at the end of the day, the main benefit is better learning outcomes for the students. Okay, I'm going to jump now to some key assessment principles. And we're going to start with different types of tests. Okay, a little exercise for you just to keep you awake. Have a look at the types of tests on the left and the definition on the right. And can you match them? They're all mixed up. Give you a minute. Can you see the different types of test? Okay, we don't have long today, so I'm going to jump ahead, and you should have seen something like this. Okay, so these are different types of tests. We have what we call achievement tests. This is usually at the end of a course to make sure that the student has learned everything that has been taught. But we might also have admissions tests where we're checking to see if somebody is at the right level to join a course, testing their prior or previous knowledge. When we start a course, we might run diagnostic tests to see where our students' strengths and weaknesses lie. We might have placement tests. If we have a level system, which is typical in English teaching, we might need to stream the students according to advanced, intermediate, beginner, and so on. And then we have something called the proficiency test. And this is a test to measure general ability in a language. And these typically are not connected to a syllabus. These are just a random, well, not random, but they are a test of general proficiency. So think IELTS, think TOEFL, if you must. Think APTIS. These are tests which just test proficiency, not linked to any particular course. Okay, so I'm going to ask you just to pause to reflect, give you 30 seconds, and I want you to think about all the tests that you know in your context. What are some of the better tests? Why are they good? Who writes the tests? Is it you, your departments, senior academic managers, or is it an external company? Do you have any choice? What information do they give you, and what sort of decisions are made? So just think about that for 30 seconds. Okay, write your thoughts down on a piece of paper. Okay, so let's move on, and we're gonna now look at some of the key concepts and considerations in assessment. So this is a bit technical, but I'm going to try and simplify it for you. The first key concept is reliability. Now, this can be defined as the extent to which you can get the same results on a different occasion. So could you give your test to a different teacher, for example, and would their class be performed equally well? So in a different context with a different teacher, will it give the same results? Okay, so why is this important? Well, this might help you ask yourself a question. Is it the right kind of test that I'm using? Is it reliable? Is it accurate enough. Okay, the next key concept is called practicality, and this is very important for teachers. This is one of the things that we care most about, because this is about, do we have the time and the resources to do this test easily? And very often, the marking of the test is going to be a key consideration here. If you can give your students a wonderful test for 5 hours, but then if you then have to go through and mark every single answer or mark 100 essays, it's going to take you longer than the students. So these are some of the considerations of a good test. How much does it cost, if anything? What about time? What about materials? Do you have to print a lot? Is it easy to score? Is it easy to administer? Do you need to observe students doing it to make sure they don't cheat? Can you do it on a computer? Do you need different versions of this test? What about preparing for the test, the practice, etc.? So these are all the practical considerations of assessment. So you may have the right test, maybe a diagnostic test, might be the right type, it might be reliable, but is it easy to use in your context? Do you have the resources to implement it? Okay, the next concept is called authenticity. And this is about the actual tasks and items and language in the test, about whether it's actually authentic and meaningful for the test taker. Okay, now what we have this concept called target language use. So we want our students to be able to do something with language. So does this test actually test that? Okay. So the characteristics of the target language, what we're trying to teach, must match the characteristics of the task in the test. So we need to think about the situations, like at the shop, in a restaurant, at the office. We need to think about topics, which we want the students to be able to talk about, whether it's a business meeting or whether it is a school project. We need to think about genres. Are we getting students to write an email or an essay, or we want them to give a formal speech or informal conversation? So then we need to choose the tasks and be very careful about testing the things that we really want them to be able to do, matching the test to the goals. Yeah. So does it test the language and skills they are supposed to be learning in an authentic way? Finally, well, not finally, but the fourth point here is called impact. And very often, and you may have heard this term, it's called washback. This is the influence of testing on teaching and learning. So, for example, if you're in the classroom, but you're just preparing them for a test, are you actually teaching them how to use a language, or are you just teaching them how to pass a test? These are important questions. Because if we just teach the test, then what happens is students try to find model answers, memorize answers, etc., etc. They try to predict what's coming up, and then it becomes a game rather than an actual learning experience. So we also need to remember that there are wider impacts on society of tests. The way we test influences the way people learn, and it can also have an impact on our, the reactions of parents, the reactions of policy makers, etc. So we actually want the testing to affect learner behaviors in a positive way. And we want it to match our wider cultural and educational context. Okay, am I missing something? Yes, of course I am. It's a rhetorical question. The core concept, you've probably heard about this, which is validity. You might hear about people saying the test is not valid, the test is very valid. And here's a technical definition. It's concerned with the clarification and justification of the intended interpretations and uses of observed scores. Not easy to remember that. So try and remember this one. This is much more straightforward. The test measures what it claims to measure. And that's it. That is the core concept of validity. Does the test do what it claims to do? Okay. And how do we know that? Well, we often look for what we call the construct. And this will be the theoretical definition of what the test is testing. And you will often find it, the construct, explained or at least referred to within the test specification documents. And I'll show you an example later. Okay, so they're the main principles of assessment, but there are, as I said, there are many other aspects to explore. We can talk about subjective and objective evaluation. We talk about norm referenced and criterion referenced. We talk about direct, semi-direct, discrete, and integrated. There are many other things. And nowadays, one of the big discussions is over human marking or AI marking. That's something that's going to change the landscape of testing in many ways. If you're interested in reading more, I invite you to visit the British Council pages. We have lots of resources to support educators and teachers especially. So this one will take you to a series of like short courses on how language assessment works, kind of nice little videos to explain difficult concepts. And then within the teaching pages, if you're not familiar with these, there are lots of resources and lesson plans for teachers at this site, Teaching English, and there's a whole section there on assessing learning. Okay, so a reminder of key concepts for you. Validity. Does it do what it claims to do? Reliability. Is it accurate? Does it give the same results again and again? Is it easy to administer and score, i.e., is it practical? What is the washback going to be? What effect is it going to have on teaching and learning? And does it test everyone equally? So these are key concepts of assessment. So when we apply this to a test, we can tell a quality test if it is valid, accurate, reliable, practical, and also authentic and fair, and has a positive impact. Now, just to emphasize this point, this is one of the theories that underpins the British Council's approach to assessment, which is called the comprehensive learning system. And this is where we understand that education, especially educational reform, for example, but just education generally, works best when there are clear connections between the curriculum, the delivery by teachers, and the materials used to deliver the curriculum, along with assessment. And we really need all three corners to be in step and to be in sequence and to be connected. Yeah, there is no point assessing things which are not in the curriculum. And there is no point teaching a curriculum if the assessment is not aligned to it. Okay, so with good tests, we always want to know, is it aligned with the curriculum? What impact is it going to have on teaching and learning? What is the washback? Okay, I'm going to pause again, and I'd just like you to take 30 seconds to think about those concepts in in basic education, primary and secondary education, what comes to mind? What's your opinion about the tests that are being used? What impact do they have on teaching and learning? Are they fair? Are they meaningful? Do they actually foster positive teaching and learning experiences? Okay, again, just jot down your ideas and maybe we can discuss them later. Okay, let's move to the role of the CFR in language assessment. The CFR was developed in 2001 after many decades of research, should be mentioned. It was a pan-European project. So it was not aimed at English alone. It was aimed at all the European languages. So it was actually born in a multilingual environment as a transparent framework that could describe people's ability to communicate in different languages, okay? So it describes communicative ability in a language. It does not describe English exactly. What it does is it focuses on communicative situations, communicative tasks, and a whole range of different features of communication, only one of which is linguistic knowledge. And what it does is it gives real-world communicative statements in can-do form, which can be converted into learning aims. And those learning aims, in turn, can equally become teaching aims. And those learning aims and teaching aims also become the assessment criteria. So this is where the learning and the teaching and the assessment can all be focused on the same framework of competency. This is why it's become so popular, not only in Europe, but it has started to spread around the world. Japan, for example, has adapted it to its own education system. China also has adapted the CFR and produced its own Chinese framework. Vietnam has done the same. And other countries too have implemented interpretations of the framework, or they've just used the framework as it is. So it's become internationally recognized as a common language, especially for the global scale, the level system, and the way it's broken down into different interactivity, different skills, shall we say, or different modes of communication. So whether that is comprehension, interaction, production, and mediation. And because it came from a place where there were 47 different languages, it is from its very beginning multicultural and plurilingual. So it can be used for any language. Now, what you might like to know in terms of basic education is that the CFR descriptions are all free, and there are lots of resources for educators. Now, it is a very complex, difficult document, the original book. However, there are different levels that you can engage with it. And one thing that you might find useful are samples of learning aims for young learners. So what they did is they sampled young learner English language portfolios from around Europe, and they validated them and tested them, and then they put them into tables And they decided to split it into two age groups. The first was primary, so basically age 7 to 10. And the second was lower secondary, which was 11 to 15 years old. And then from 16 above, it's considered appropriate to just use the CFR, the original version, which is for adults and young people. So if you're interested in having access to a resource which is free, which might give you inspiration for learning aims, for your teaching aims, for assessment tasks, please do take those links. It's free. Okay. So the CFR has had an impact in the world of testing. The British Council, for example, developed its own test based on a thorough analysis of the CFR and a project to align English language teaching syllabuses to the CFR. And we came up with a test. And following the the principles of good assessment, the British Council is very transparent about the design of APTIS. So it produces very long technical manuals explaining how the test works. And it's very clear about the test construct. Now, remember I mentioned that before? Well, here's an example of a task specification. You can't see the fine detail there, but trust me, it clearly indicates the level expected, and it also details the levels of performance, both quantitatively and qualitatively, etc. A good test will also allow it to be validated by external researchers. And it would also support the test takers with guidance, preparation resources, demo tests, and everything. So that's also what APTIS does. And APTIS has been very popular, and it has actually resulted in the British Council creating a number of tests for the right context and the right test taker. So we actually have tests at different levels. So we have APTIS General and APTIS Advanced. We also have a special APTIS test for teachers, where all the situations and much of the vocabulary and communicative acts are based on things that will be familiar with teachers. We also have a test especially for teenagers, 11 to 15, which is based on the things that they're interested in, about school life, homework, hobbies, social media, things like that. And a new thing from the British Council is actually a primary English test. And this is supposed to be fun and engaging for young learners. So a lot of it uses like animation, and it's like kind of interactive with the young person in that it will change and adapt according to the answers it gets from the young learner. And it's adaptive, and it's using AI in order to do that, and in order to allow the student to produce as much as they can of their English, so that then the AI can then assess it and provide feedback. So this is the way that assessment is going. Assessment can become more targeted, more context specific. It's going to be supported by AI in the future, but it's always going to be needed to align with an accepted standard. And this is the standard, the CFR, which is becoming more and more important around the world, and especially in the ASEAN region. So all the British Council exams now they are mapped to the CFR and will give a clear CFR profile. How is this done? I'm going to go quickly through this, but the way that the APTIS test is designed will give you some clues about how you as a teacher can design assessment tasks in your classroom. So what happens is that the test builders must be familiar with the CFR. They then can use the learning aims or the descriptors from the CFR to think about tasks and tests, how to specify what they want to test. They would then set the standards, what they expect in terms of good performance, bad performance, medium performance. And then they would try it out and validate it and make sure that it is at the right level. It's telling us what we want it to say. So in summary, the CFR is taken as a starting point for these tests. The questions are designed to represent meaningful communicative situations, which again are described in the CFR. And then variants reflect the topics and context the test taker can identify with. And then the marking criteria or the criteria for success are directly there from the CFR. Okay, so I'm going to try to finish in the next 5-10 minutes. I hope that's okay, Cheche. We're going to look quickly at applying language assessment literacy to the classroom. So as teachers, how can you take this into schools? Well, first of all, I like to quote this gentleman here, Mr. Grant Wiggins, because I think he's got a point. Our students, they need feedback more than they need teaching. They need to know where they are, where they can be, how to get there. And this is the principle of formative assessment. So let's first of all compare formative and summative assessment. This is often called the of-for dichotomy. So summative assessment tends to be assessment of learning. It's at the end of the learning. Whereas formative assessment, it's for learning because it gives us information which will then tell us what we need to learn next. Summative assessment tends to end up in decisions by people outside the classroom. So whether that's a university admissions office saying yes or no to an application, or whether it's a teacher saying you can move up to the next group, next level, etc. Whereas formative assessment tends to be between the teacher and the students inside the classroom. I like this one too. Summative assessment can be very judgmental, but formative assessment is developmental. So one way to remember this is to consider the difference of a chef in a kitchen who tests the soup as he's making it to see if it needs any further ingredients, more salt, more pepper, more herbs, whatever. But the soup is not finished. But once that soup is finished and then served to the customer is going to taste the soup and they're going to make up their mind, is it good or is it bad? So summative assessment is like tasting the soup. Formative assessment is like testing the soup. So very quickly, what do you think? You don't need to put any answers in the chat, just on your own. What are these? Are these formative or summative tests? What do you think? Okay, so typically, not always, okay, but summative tests tend to be on the left there. Placement, progress, achievement, final exam, etc. And then on the right, we've got diagnostics, teacher monitoring, teacher questions, peer assessment, self-assessment. Now, when I say typically, I mean that sometimes a summative assessment may be taken as formative, for example, a progress test. Okay, now here's the definition of formative assessment. You can read that. So that definition comes from a man called Dylan William, who wrote a book that's become very famous called Inside the Black Box, Raising Standards Through Classroom Assessment. And he wrote this, his co-author was Paul Black. Now, I want to point out that they were writing on their experiences in secondary schools not in the UK, sorry, I think it was in Ireland or in Northern Ireland, or Wales. Oh, no, it was in Wales, sorry. So it was in the UK, and they were working in schools, and they found out some very interesting things. They were watching different teachers, and they found out that the most effective teachers were using formative assessment. Whether they knew what it was or not, they were using it and they were more effective. They found that the formative assessment routines were having a very positive effect on the achievement of the learners in the class. They found that overall, by using formative assessment, the standards in the school and the class were going up. So if you're interested in this, and you should be, there's a very easy to read article here, which summarizes the thinking behind formative assessment. And I strongly recommend that you read that article. It will only take you 15, 20 minutes, but could change your life. But basically, I'm going to summarize here. The principles are, and what they found is that learners do better when they understand what they're supposed to do and what success will look like. Learners also improve when they receive opportunities for feedback, which is meaningful, something that they can then use to improve. And this is mainly the teacher's role, they understand how to close the gap. The teacher can help them understand how to get from point A to point B. So we can see formative assessment as a cycle. Where is the learner? So we give feedback, say, okay, you're doing quite well, but we give evidence as well. But we have to remind students about the success criteria. So we're comparing a little bit where they are now to where they want to be. So where are they going? What are the learning goals? What's the success criteria? And then our job as teachers is to help them understand how to get there. Okay, we might need to help them with the steps. Go and have a look at this, try practicing this. Have you done this? Why don't you compare with this student, etc.? Lots of ideas. So it sounds very easy, but there is difficulty and challenge this. It does take time because some things are easier. We can be very positive with our learners and communicate confidence. We can empower learners to be more active and engaged in their own learning. But some teachers struggle with this because we have to release a bit of control. And when it gets good, we're actually allowing learners to negotiate or set their own learning goals. And we're then also handing over the role of evaluation to the student themselves or to students in pairs or in small groups, where we're encouraging peer and self-assessment amongst the students. So teachers have to relinquish a little bit of control in order for the students to start taking control of their learning. And we can do this in different ways. We can collect information formally or informally about the different learners. We can adjust our teaching plans in order to accommodate, maybe some review or something new or some recycling. We can discuss the learning objectives with the students so they know what you're planning to teach them, what they should be learning. And we can also negotiate the success criteria with them so that they understand what a good performance is. In the classroom, questioning becomes a very, very important technique. How we interact with students when they give us an answer, don't just say, yes, very good. Say, yes, why? Explain, develop, encourage further, deeper thinking. When we give feedback, it should be specific and it should be something they can use. And peer feedback is something that you'll need to help them with, because at the beginning they'll be shy, or they won't want to be too critical, or the other way, they're too critical. But it takes some time. And self-assessment is critical because this is a metacognitive skill. And this is a skill for life. This is something that is often considered a 21st century skill. The ability to monitor and control your own progress, called self-regulation or metacognitive awareness about learning. It's going to be critical because the world is changing so fast that what they learn in school is going to be meaningless anyway. What they need to know is how to learn. Not what to learn, but how to learn. Anyway, to round up, when applying assessment principles to teaching in the classroom, just consider these questions. Is the task aligned to learning objectives and to the curriculum? Is it going to give you clear and useful results? Could other teachers use it in a similar way? Is it going to take a lot of effort to set up? How do I score it? Ooh, maybe I can get the students to grade it, peer assessment. Could it be done online? Make it easy. Impact. Is this going to be motivating to learners, or is it going to crush their very soul and put them to sleep? Fair. Is it going to be fair to our students? Do we need to adapt it? Do we need to allow students to use their own language to negotiate, to look at some of the items? Do we allow a response in somebody's own language? No, this might depend on age, level, and so on. So in summary then, we've talked a lot about the principles of assessment of learning. Tends to be formal, conscious, often separated from the learning itself, often leads to decisions by other people outside the classroom. So we see it's curriculum to teaching, to assessment, to decisions. Assessment for learning, though, is more a cycle. And this is about progress. This is perhaps more frequent, more informal. It can even be unconscious. It could be integrated into tasks and projects. The feedback can take different forms, from thumbs up to a 77.32 out of 100. Or it could be, but anyway, it leads to decisions about the next steps in learning. So that's why it brings it back to in a cycle. Assessment as learning is the ultimate goal, in a way, where students would become independent, where they can identify their own learning objectives. They know how to find learning opportunities themselves. They can get feedback from their peers, but they can also critique themselves, leading to formative assessment and new objectives. So this is what adults pretty much have to do. When you're in a job, you have to kind of keep up with your own education. So this is a lifelong learning skill. So I have a horrible feeling I've overrun, Cheche. I'm so sorry. But this is the final slide. Just please take a few seconds to think about how formative assessment is or could be in the primary, secondary education context in which you are. Okay, thank you very much. Cheche, over to you.
Thank you so much, Sir Andy. That's Mr. Andy Milner. And we're going to have him back after our next resource person. So our next panel member and resource speaker is Miss Ayet Ferriols, ang suki ng ACELT. Thank you so much again for saying yes to this, Miss Ayet Ferriols. She is currently taking up Doctor of Philosophy in Applied Linguistics at the De La Salle University, Manila, where she also earned her Master of Arts degree in teaching the English language. She holds a Bachelor of Arts degree in English and graduated magna cum laude from the Polytechnic University of the Philippines. She taught English in a number of universities and local higher education institutions, including the De La Salle University and the National University in Manila. And she was involved in various research and training on language teaching before finally becoming a curriculum specialist in English for the Department of Education Central Office. As part of the Bureau of Curriculum Development, the nature of her work involves crafting the national curriculum framework, standards, and policies, and managing and providing technical assistance in various programs as capacity building of teachers and development of learners' materials. Currently, Ms. Ayet serves as the supervising education program specialist for English and mother tongue and the program lead for the NRP or the National Reading Program. Everyone, please help me welcome Ms. Ayet Ferriols to talk about language assessment in basic education, particularly in the context of the Philippines. Ms. Ayet.
Thank you very much, Doc Che. Please give me a few moments as I share my slide. Okay, can everybody see my slide? Okay, thank you. Okay, so once again, good afternoon, everyone, to the Ateneo Center for English Language Teaching and the British Council. Thank you so much for having me again, but this time to talk about the language assessment in basic education. So as you all very well know, the Department of Education released an enhancement of the K-12 curriculum, which you have all come to know as the Matatag curriculum. So this curriculum, along with the strengthened senior high school curriculum, is a product of many years of hard work and collaboration with hundreds of stakeholders, both internal and external, to the DepEd. And even international experts were involved in an effort to address reports of curriculum congestion, high cognitive demand, and lack of prerequisite skills. Now, not to discount the very important work that we do in our office, which is the Bureau of Curriculum Development, and everyone involved in the crafting of the curriculum guides, but the release of the curriculum is only one part of its natural life cycle. Right now, another equally significant phase of the curriculum cycle is in motion, and that is the curriculum implementation. So this is where you, our school leaders and teachers and future educators come in. I always say during orientations and trainings that if the curriculum is considered the heart of education, then the teachers are the lifeblood. Implementation through delivery is where the curriculum comes alive in the classroom. And implementation has another role because it feeds back into the cycle of review. Because a good curriculum is never finished and it always evolves as our learners, our communities, and our society also evolve. During implementation, our focus now shifts from the intended curriculum. So this is our mandate. This is the curriculum guides, which tell us all of the learning standards and the expected outcomes. From there, we shift our focus to the other dimensions of the curriculum. So we have the implemented curriculum, okay, or what's actually being taught in the classroom. So this is where we take a look at what's actually happening inside, how the teaching and learning process goes about. We also take a look at the tested curriculum, which refers to the competencies assessed through both classroom-based assessments and large-scale assessments like the National Achievement Test, the PISA, or even the CPLM. And finally, the attained curriculum, which looks at whether or not students actually achieved the standards that were set by our curriculum guides or our intended curriculum, as measured by their performance in assessments, as well as their preparedness for life after school. Now, the focus of our discussion this afternoon is assessment and how this ties all of the dimensions of the curriculum together. Therefore, assessment is a very significant aspect of teaching and learning. Assessment is the means through which the implemented and the tested curriculum are enacted and measured. So this is a critical component that encompasses the methods and tools used to evaluate students' learning and skills, just like what Sir Andy discussed a while ago. Now, assessment also guides instruction by providing feedback on student progress, allowing teachers like us to adjust lessons based on strengths and gaps. Finally, it informs educational decisions at the classroom, school, and even the national level, shaping instructional adjustments, school improvements, and policy reforms like teacher training programs. But how well do teachers know how to assess learners? And I hope that our future educators, the students from PUP, from my alma mater, I hope that this is something that you also ask yourselves. It's not just a matter of being a good teacher, but it's also a matter of being a good test maker. Lately, as you all may know, there have been news about grade inflation. So what is grade inflation? You may notice that every learner now is an honor student. Everyone has a distinction or an award. But these are not translated into the results of both local and international large-scale assessments, like the National Achievement Test or the PISA. So what's wrong? One factor may be worth considering, and this is assessment literacy, or the teacher's ability to design, implement, and interpret assessments effectively to accurately measure student learning. So this isn't just about the ability to give out tests. Okay, it's about the ability to create effective tools like quizzes, projects, or performance tasks that truly reflect what students know and can do. Assessment literacy acts as a bridge connecting instructional practices to student performance. So when teachers are skilled in crafting assessments that align with learning goals, they can better guide students toward mastering key competencies like problem solving, critical thinking, or other higher order thinking skills. However, research reveals that the assessment literacy of Filipino teachers is generally low or lacking due to significant challenges in teacher preparation and practice. And this is a very sad fact, evidenced by the literature that I'm going to discuss this afternoon. So we're going to explore only 3 key studies, but there are a lot of research that talks to us about assessment literacy, especially in the context of the Philippines. Now, these key studies that I've chosen for this afternoon's discussion highlight assessment literacy challenges in the Philippine context. So first is the 2014 study by Hailaya in Tawi-Tawi, which examined elementary and secondary school teachers and found that their assessment literacy is relatively low. Across all specific assessment standards like designing valid tests or interpreting results, teachers scored below average, signaling a need for stronger training in assessment practices. Our next study is a 2020 study by Napanoy and Beckley, which focused on public elementary schools, teachers in indigenous communities in the northern Philippines. So their findings were striking because, according to them, teachers achieved an overall mean score of just 30.64 on a 35-item assessment literacy test. Imagine that, not even 31% in an assessment literacy test. So this indicates significant gaps in creating and using assessments effectively. And finally, Plata's 2018 study noted that both in-service and pre-service teachers lack adequate assessment literacy, pointing to misalignments in CHEDS, or the Commission on Higher Education's Teacher Education Program, and the Philippine Professional Standards for Teachers, particularly in Domain 5, which focuses on assessment. So these studies underscore the urgent need to enhance teacher training and improve assessment practices so that we can also improve our student learning outcomes. This is our reality. nakakalungkot po, it's very sad. It's a very sad reality. When teachers lack the skills to design and interpret assessments effectively, it creates a disconnect between classroom instruction and the demands of high-stakes assessments like PISA or the National Achievement Test, and even the demands of the real world. Instead of fostering applied literacy and higher-order thinking skills needed for real-world tasks, instruction often falls back on rote learning, yung mga madali na lang pong i-test, okay, those that are easy to assess. To make things worse, this misalignment limits meaningful learning and worsens inequities as students from undeserved communities are hit hardest by shallow and test-focused teaching. So imagine in public schools, especially our pre-service teachers who are going to experience this in the future. And if we have teachers right now in the public schools, I know your realities in the field. In one classroom, there are more than 50 students, some even reporting around 80 to 90 students. So how are you going to provide effective assessment practices in a classroom as big as that? And unfortunately, this is compounded by the realities of our public education system. Our teachers are not supported, our teachers are not given the space and the tools to provide effective assessment practices. And what happens is our student learning outcomes are compromised. Now, going back to teacher assessment literacy. Low assessment literacy can also lead to subjective grading. So dito na po papasok yung grade inflation, the one that I was talking about. If there is subjective grading and teachers struggle to create valid and reliable assessment tools like quizzes or rubrics, this means that they might inadvertently, hindi po sinasadya, they might inadvertently award higher grades for superficial understanding, inflating the marks without reflecting true mastery. So by addressing these gaps through targeted assessment literacy training, we can align assessments with learning goals, promote deeper learning, and reduce inequities. Now, I know that this is a handful. This is too much right now. But one way to hone our teachers' assessment literacy is by ensuring that they have a solid understanding of the intended curriculum. So let's go back to just the intended curriculum or our curriculum guides. Let's start from there because it all stems here. If you know the what, which are the standards, the roadmap, the learning outcomes that you expect from your students, if this is clear, then the how becomes easier. It becomes more manageable tapping into what we know about assessment and using the right tools to test learners vis-a-vis the curriculum standards that we have set. So just to give you a brief recap about the essential message of the curriculum, particularly our language curricula, English, Filipino, reading and literacy and languages. Here are the big ideas, and we know that in every key stage, we focus on just one big idea, which shifts from one stage to another. So let's take a look back at key stage 1, the goal of which is literacy formation and development. And this is supported by skills and competencies that focus on the development of skills on language and text. By key stage 2, the focus shifts to language. Once learners achieve basic literacy and once they've learned to read, okay, they are now ready to read in order to learn. So in this key stage, you will find that the learning competencies on literacy and text support the development of language skills or communicative competence, which is the goal of key stage 2. Finally, in key stage 3, we have text. So this is where learners develop their faculties for reading, writing, and using the language appropriately. Here, we want to teach them how to consume and produce text effectively. And all of these are articulated in the curriculum standards for every key stage and grade level. True to the claim that the Matatag curriculum is at par with international standards, when the English curriculum standards are mapped against the Common European Framework of Reference for Languages, or the CEFR, you will find parallelism across different key stages. So on this slide, you will find the outline of the progression from basic to advanced literacy skills mapped to the CEFR levels. For key stage 1, which covers grades 2 and 3, the curriculum aims to develop oracy and basic literacy skills. So this would include skills like using English with simple words, understanding simple text, and creating basic text with comprehension. This, you will find, aligns with CEFR's pre-A1 to A1 levels, where students gain basic recognition of words, phrases, and simple sentences, and can understand and produce very simple spoken and written communication. Moving on to Key Stage 2, which refers to grades 4 to 6, the focus now shifts to enhancing applied and critical literacy skills. So here is where we want our students to develop fluency in writing and speaking with structured, coherent sentences, introducing multimedia and visual literacy. And you will find that this corresponds to the CEFR's A2 to B1 levels, where students can understand and express opinions on familiar topics, write structured text with increasing complexity, and use tone, mood, and multimedia elements for meaning making. Finally, in Key Stage 3, or grades 7 to 10, and Key Stage 4, or senior high school, which targets high-level communicative competence, analyzing literature from diverse cultural backgrounds, producing academic texts, mastering sophisticated argumentation and research writing. All of these, which are the standards of Key Stages 3 to 4, aligns with CEFR's B2 to C1 levels, where students can critically evaluate texts, produce detailed writing, express ideas fluently, and engage in academic and professional communication. This alignment ensures that as students progress, their English skills meet globally recognized benchmarks, preparing them for both local and international contexts. Now, how does assessment look like in each key stage? So let's take a look at Key Stage 1. Here, we dive into assessment for literacy because remember, the big idea for Key Stage 1 is literacy. Our focus is to help our students form and develop their literacy skills. So, assessment for literacy should focus on measuring learners' ability to read, write, listen, and speak in the target language. So, in this case, that's English, as well as their capacity to comprehend and interpret texts. So, these assessments should be authentic and meaningful, incorporating real-world texts, literary or imaginative works, and tasks that reflect diverse contexts and purposes of language use. And they must also align with the curriculum standards because there has to be parallelism between our curriculum standards and your assessment practice. These kinds of assessments should track progress in acquiring the essential literacy skills, knowledge, and dispositions. So please be reminded that part of the pedagogical approach for Key Stage 1 is rooted in translanguaging. And this is very important. We recognize the use of translanguaging as well as explicit and implicit instruction and a developmental view of literacy. So the best assessment strategies for Key Stage 1 are those that are formative, process-oriented, and multimodal. To make this more concrete, okay, here are some examples. First, formative and developmental assessment tracks progress over time. So hindi lang ito isahan. It's not a one-time thing. Okay, we have to track progress over time using tools like running records, anecdotal notes, checklists for reading behaviors, and even developmental writing samples. This fits because it views literacy as a journey, allowing teachers to adapt instruction responsively. Okay? Another example is multimodal performance tasks like oral story telling or retelling of a story, picture-supported storytelling, bilingual vocabulary journals, or even multilingual vocabulary journals, dramatized reading or drawing-based responses. All of these practices align with translanguaging by letting learners express understanding in both their first language and the target language, which is English. Another example that you can do in your respective classrooms is portfolio-based assessment, which captures growth across time. So you can collect writing samples, reading logs, audio recordings, and even teacher-guided reflections, which emphasize process and learner agency. Our fourth example is observation and interaction-based tools, like structured observations, reading conferences, and dialogic assessments. So these evaluate comprehension in naturalistic and scaffolded settings. Finally, a note on rubrics. Rubrics are just as important as your assessment tools. So rubrics have to be anchored in developmental progressions and use stages like emergent or transitional literacy, avoiding binary scoring to support differentiated instruction for learners at various acquisition levels. So together, all of these strategies ensure a holistic and supportive approach to literacy assessment. Okay, so I'm going beyond my time. I've included in my slide a screenshot of the sample learning or lesson exemplars that we have provided in the curriculum guides for English. So if you take a look at the curriculum guide, if you have digital copies of this or if you have hard copies, go immediately to the appendices and you will find all of these here. So this is a sample of how we deliver the learning competencies. So you will find that there are many learning competencies that you can tackle in just one lesson. And if you translate these into lesson objectives, this is something that you can come up with. Okay. And if you go further, okay, so you have there a list of activities and a list of things that you can do with your learners that support the principles and theories that we espouse in the curriculum guide. So this is for Key Stage 1, and you are free to explore this in the curriculum guide, which is available on our DepEd website. Okay, for Key Stage 2, what are the assessment strategies that we could use? Remember that in Key Stage 2, we now shift into the big idea of language, okay, which measures the learner's ability to use language effectively and appropriately across different contexts, be it personal, social, or academic. This assessment embraces translanguaging, valuing learners' first language as a resource for acquiring a second language, while also tracking progress in social-linguistic competence. Now, the pedagogical approach that is espoused in the second key stage is communicative language teaching, or CLT. And this has a natural counterpart in assessment, which is known as communicative language assessment, or CLA. Unlike traditional testing, which is focused on isolated grammar drills, as you know, CLA, much like CLT, is an approach that mirrors its principles by prioritizing authentic and purposeful language use. So it evaluates the learner's ability to engage in meaningful interaction, perform task-based activities like writing an email, giving a short talk. Alam niyo po na very interesting, we have a learning competency there which asks learners to fill out bank forms. Okay, something as specific and practical as that. And the goal of CLA is to integrate these skills, okay, such as listening, speaking, reading, and writing, all while considering the audience and purpose. So CLA reflects the core idea of communicative language teaching, that language should be used as a tool for negotiating meaning and not just mastering form. So allow me to concretize this by providing you with a few examples, okay? For Key Stage 2, communicative language assessment is a perfect fit because it features performance tasks like writing invitations or conducting interviews, role plays, and dialogues to assess spontaneous interaction, and integrated assessments like reading a message and replying via email. Activities and tasks as practical and as realistic as that. The rubrics for CLA should focus on communicative effectiveness. So this includes clarity, coherence, appropriateness, and interaction, rather than just the focus on grammar or vocabulary. So this shift supports our focus coming from form to meaning, okay? So we shift from form-focused to meaning-focused learning and encourage translanguaging for scaffolding and negotiation. So this aligns with the curriculum's emphasis on collaboration, presentations, and contextualized writing. In short, CLA as an assessment strategy extends communicative language teaching into assessment by ensuring a cohesive approach that values communication over mere correctness. So once again, I have included in my slide deck a copy of the lesson exemplar that we have for Key Stage 2. Okay, and on this slide, you have all of the activities that you can use for grades 4 to 6. Okay. Now to our last key stage, which is Key Stage 3. So I'd like for us to explore the assessment for text, which is the big idea that is focused on this key stage. Okay, so assessment for text, which measures learners' ability to comprehend, analyze, and create various types of text like literary, informational, and transactional texts, while incorporating multimodal forms like print, visual, and digital media. This assessment evaluates learners' skills in using different modes in media to communicate effectively alongside their progress in critical literacy, including analyzing texts critically and using them to construct and convey meaning. So you will find that the standards for Key Stage 3 are really very high. Okay, remember we're aiming for at least CEFR level B2 until C1 in Key Stage 3. So for Key Stage 3, where the pedagogy adopts a genre-based approach to build critical reading and writing skills, the ideal assessment method is genre-based performance assessment, but this is not the only assessment strategy that you can use. This is just one that I'll be focusing on, but there are many others that you can use. However, this aligns more with the teaching strategy that is supported by the curriculum. Now, in genre-based performance assessment, it evaluates the learner's ability to understand, analyze, and produce text within specific genres, leveraging both linguistic and structural features. Now, how does this look like in the classroom? Okay. First, genre-based performance tasks involve learners creating text like editorials, feature articles, narrative essays, or reviews, directly assessing their grasp of genre-specific structures, purposes, and language. So before they are asked, our learners are asked to produce their own text. They are first exposed to the text that is in focus. So for example, in the first quarter of grade 7, the focus is on literary text, specifically Philippine literature. So before they are asked to write their own literary text, they are going to be reading texts of this genre first. Okay, so reception before production. Okay, another strategy that you can use is text analysis. Okay, like annotating authentic texts or identifying genre markers or critiquing structural influences. All of these develop and assess critical reading and genre awareness. Another strategy is multilingual scaffolding, which allows learners to use their first language for brainstorming or discussing texts before producing English outputs, supporting translanguaging and deeper comprehension. Remember, the goal of then MTBMLE is to use the first language or the language that the learners know best so that there is a deeper and more meaningful engagement with learning. Okay, and so we wish for this to continue even in the absence of MTBMLE through translanguaging so that when learners are confronted with texts that are a little bit more difficult because this is key stage 3, they can still comprehend it better because they are allowed to dialogue with their teachers and with their colleagues or their peers so that comprehension would be attained, especially when dealing with informational texts which are highly academic. Okay. Another strategy that we can use is, of course, when creating rubrics, these rubrics have to be anchored in genre conventions. Okay, like elements like organization, tone, cohesion, and purpose, ensuring that assessment reflects genre mastery over just grammar, okay, or surface level knowledge of language. Fifth, integrated reading and writing tasks, like writing a persuasive piece after analyzing one, reinforce the reciprocal link between reading and writing. So this is what I was talking to you about. It's very important that we integrate reading and writing tasks by first introducing the text to our learners before asking them to produce a text similar to that. And finally, portfolio. Okay, ilang beses po natin in-input yung portfolio dito, but portfolio assessment is very effective because it includes a curated set of genre-based texts with reflections, capturing growth, and encouraging metacognitive engagement. This approach prioritizes genre fluency, critical engagement, and purposeful language use, aligning perfectly with the educational goals of Key Stage 3. So once again, before I end, here are some of the parts of the lesson exemplar that we have provided in the curriculum guide. So if you're planning on writing your own lesson plans, I hope that you can consider the ones that we have provided in the curriculum guides. I hope that my talk helped. I hope that you've learned something from me this afternoon. Maraming salamat po muli sa pagkakataon.
Thank you so much, Miss Ayet. Definitely helpful as always. So please join me now again as we move on. Andy, please join me and Ayet as we move on to the next part of the webinar. Just to let you know, it's 4:26. We said that the webinar is just going to be for until 4:30, but I hope you can bear with us. I think it will be good to continue with our panel discussion for about another 10 minutes if you can still continue to join us, if that's okay. So in this panel discussion, we're also going to have an open forum so we can all engage everyone in the discussion. As you may have seen in the chat box, you're encouraged to use the chat box if you have comments, if you have questions. And may I request also Mr. Mike Cabigon Business Development Manager at the British Council, to help us with the comments in the chat box. Mike, maybe you can join us now. And Miss Ayet there. Okay. So do we have any questions? Because if there's none, I have a question.
Yeah, maybe we can start
Okay.
with your question, Miss Cheche.
All right. So this is a question that's actually more specific to our context in the Philippines, but this is something based off of what Andy mentioned earlier, that and we're all familiar with, no? One of the qualities of an effective assessment tool is fairness, and among them, of course, you have validity, reliability. I'm not going to repeat all of them anymore, but when we talk about fairness, so I'm going to address Miss Ayat muna, siguro, to answer this question. How fair are our assessment practices in the Philippines, particularly in the English language classrooms, considering that our learners are multilingual learners?
Thank you very much, Doctor. That's a very difficult question, ano po, and there's no one straight answer to that question. So I'm going to make my answer as nuanced as possible. Now, there are two blends that we would like to consider when answering that question when it comes to fairness. First is fairness of assessment practices in our own language classrooms. So sa classroom level po muna. Of course, our teachers are trying to be as fair as they can. However, because they are limited by, as we have seen in the literature, they're limited by what they know about assessment literacy. And this may be because there's not a lot of focus on how assessment should be done. And there's more focus on how teaching should be done. And this becomes a little bit left out. Ano po? There may not be or they may not be as knowledgeable as we would like for them to be. And so that leads to assessment practices that are less than ideal. I'd like to cite one more study, and this is by Hinona and Torres in 2020. They found that many of the assessments that teachers do, and this is parallel with another study that I found by, I think, Arnulfo in 2018. They found that the curriculum standards are not reflected in the assessment strategies that our teachers do or in the tests that they create. Okay, some tasks target sub-skills rather than the intended literacies, and this reveals a gap in validity and pedagogical coherence. Now, this tells us that teachers often interpret curriculum goals independently, iba-iba, and this is stemming from the bigger problem, which is a lack of assessment literacy among our teachers. Okay. Aside from that, there are also other factors. I'm not saying that it's theirs. And even if it's them, it's not their fault. It's again, like I said in my talk, with the necessary tools, with the necessary training, and even with the necessary space to carry out effective strategies. Another factor we need to take a look at is socioeconomic disparities. And will impact fairness. Learners in resource-poor settings, and we all know this is they face assessments that space or that they not really or this may not reflect these socioeconomic disparities, right? And finally, just to wrap up my answer, through the lens of assessment practices in language, the use of language strategies. Not all of our teachers understand what translanguaging is. Some of them may design well doing translanguaging, but us making it explicit that translanguaging should be encouraged in the curriculum, I think that's one step in the right direction. It's not enough because constantly reflected in your teaching practice, in your assessment tools, then this can disadvantage especially our multilingual learners. Okay, so there are efforts to, of course, align curriculum with assessment to improve fairness when it comes to assessment and testing, but this is compromised by systemic inequities, inconsistent assessment literacy, and limited contextualization. Now, in the lens of our participation in large-scale assessments like PISA, the Program for International Student Assessment, and even the CTLM, we all know that the higher your socioeconomic status is, the better you rank it sa. Ano po, kaya nga po sinasabi nila, there is some sort of, I'm not going to call it bias, but we find that countries that are richer or higher in terms of socioeconomic status, they fare well in PISA. They fare better than us. Okay? In the 2022 cycle, we ranked 77 out of 81 countries. Okay, showing that our learners are only attaining minimal proficiencies in reading, math, and science. And this is a very alarming thing. And according to the draft of CPLM, the language of assessment, if it's not parallel with the language of the home or the language that the child knows best, then that could impact negatively the performance of the child in that assessment. So that's one thing that we could take a look at. We could also take a look at how the test is delivered. You will need to have a high digital literacy in order for you to fare well in PISA. I'm glad that there are now alternatives to taking PISA, yung hindi na po computer mediated, because not all of our learners, until now, this is the painful truth, not all of us have access to these gadgets, to even a simple laptop or computer. Not everyone has that luxury. And for you to suddenly expose the child to a piece of technology that he or she is not familiar with and expect him or her to do well in that test, I think that's unfair. Okay, so there are some critics that may argue that PISA's design does not fully reflect our local linguistic and cultural context. Okay, so there is inevitably bias kahit sa ang assessment naman po. Okay.
So,
Now-
Miss Ayet, before you continue, now that you
Yes,
mentioned
Doctor.
that, can I just ask what language was used to assess our students in PISA in the last PISA results that we, you know?
I can't say with confidence, Dokche, if they changed it, but in the earlier PISA, it was English,
Yes.
because we were asked what the medium of teaching and learning is. And it was very clear in our MTB-MLE policy that mother tongue is only used as a medium of instruction in the first key stage. And because our PISA test takers are already 15 years old, they're in the third key stage, then it was assumed that they already know how to take the test in either Filipino or English. And in this case, I think it was English that was tested.
Okay, you were going to say something before I interrupted you.
Yes, no, actually that's the end of my response. So actually po, when we have discussions about taking a look at international large-scale assessments, I would always recommend looking at the CPLM or the Southeast Asian Primary Learning Metrics, which is more contextualized for the Philippines. Unfortunately though, there's not much difference in the results of PISA and CPLM, but there are efforts of the CPLM being available in the mother languages of the Philippines.
Thank you so much. That's very informative. Andy, you might want to chime in. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that context in the Philippines. That's why it's actually difficult to, yeah, go ahead.
Well, only a little. But yes, I mean, these international tests can be skewed towards international norms. I mean, each country that enters into the PISA testing and scoreboard, as it were, also have their own particular contexts or way of speaking. But yes, certain countries like the Philippines with a multiplicity of home languages can be disadvantaged, perhaps. But I think also, well, I think translanguaging is very important to foster earlier ages. As we get to later stages of education, if we want our students to be able to access in a more international or more regional platform, whether it be in education or in business or work, they will find that they cannot rely on their mother tongue to communicate aspects of their message. So there is a need for them to step beyond the translanguaging to more of a focus on communicating solely in the target language, if you see what I mean. Because people in Singapore, for example, have a very similar situation. They communicate in Sinhalese. Now that's largely accent, but there might be other words and inflections thrown in as well. But ultimately, if they become more international or internationalized, they will have to drop some of that, the same way that I have to drop my slang or my colloquialisms if I'm working internationally. So there does come a point, and I think sometimes it can be a sticking point in the Philippines, where people might get to a level of language where they think it's good enough, but it can always be improved. So I mean, me myself, I can continue to improve my English. I do crosswords, and I sometimes have to look up words, and when I'm writing as well, I might, go through several iterations of editing to improve my message. But as we get to the higher levels of education, we probably want to see less translanguaging, more focus on the target language. Having said that, within the Common European Framework, there is the communicative mode, which is called mediation. And what we find there is, in multilingual contexts, this is an important communicative skill, the ability to, for example, translate something for somebody else, or to interpret the cultural background to a message, and to then interpret that in a different way. So there's all these, this skill of mediation. It's not linguistic necessarily, but it is about the focus on the message, relaying that message between speakers of different languages, relaying that message or mediating that message. So these are all important concepts as well. But I agree wholeheartedly, translanguaging, so mother tongue education for initial literacy, translanguaging to facilitate the process of learning, but not translanguaging as an excuse for weaker outputs,
Yes.
shall we
Yeah.
say?
Yes. So
I'll
Andy,
stop
I
there.
think, yeah, if we're going if we're going to back to that, I think you're referring to pedagogical translanguaging, something that we've actually talked about and done in workshops and trainings in ACELT, and also with the Department of Education, that translanguaging has to be purposeful. And Miss
Yes.
Ayat also and I have done some webinars on this as well. So the goal really is to use translanguaging deliberately, judiciously, so that, again, as you said, it's not an excuse for running out of vocabulary, running out of something to say in English,
Yes.
because of course we know that we want our teachers to be role models also in the classroom in terms of the target language. And so, yes, we support translanguaging, but it has to be pedagogical translanguaging, and that is
As
why
a
we
stepping
need.
stone. Yeah.
Yes, and that's why we need the help of different sectors in making sure that our teachers receive the kind of training that they need, to know when to use translanguaging so that they can be effectively done in the classrooms. I'd also like to go back to, I'm sure Miss Ayet will have something to say about this as well. I can read her face, but anyway, but I'd like to go back to what you mentioned about the 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 need to drop some of your nuanced, localized or variety of English earlier. And I think if we look at the value of world Englishes, that's something that we can also consider in teaching English, where exposure to the different varieties of English is important. So students will know, depending on, again, their purpose, audience, and context, students will know when their Philippine English, for example, in their context, is useful, is appropriate, and when to use which variety. I hope that is, yeah, that we make that clear on our audience. Miss Yat.
Very clear about translanguaging. Initially, I'm sure you're familiar with this, Dr. We fought for espousing Philippine English in our curriculum. Unfortunately, our teachers tend to integrity this. For example, what HSC, SBV, SNZ, do we still pursue that? These kinds of questions that deal with nitty-gritty of the classroom exchange. And at that point, because we were privy to that curriculum, we could not provide a detailed guideline on how to make Philippine English available in basic education. But hopefully, through the shaping paper, which serves as the preface of our curriculum guide, we have been very clear there that our goal is to make meaning. And in order to make this possible, then the means to do that is by tapping into the language that the child knows best, and that using the child's first languaging, by translanguaging, by accommodating the languages that they can understand, so that there's deeper understanding, there's more engagement, and there's better learning that's happening in the classrooms.
Do we have any questions? So, yet for any questions?
Yes, ma'am. We have something addressed to Andy. How do you determine each student's literacy level in the target language at the elementary level? And how do those say that we have their language?
Yes, I saw the question. I wasn't sure I completely understood about that.
Probably, yeah. Probably in the context we are Filipino, but we're learning English. But how they learn second language, yeah.
Practical features that don't utilize the structure. So, CFR is for any language, but it needs to be a shift to communicative competence and based on the act function they are doing. So, how it can have a subjective opinion about that. It can be normative. Typically, it tends to be normative assessment. Are you just like, are you stronger in the class or weaker in class? And what to for is criterion reference, where everybody shares the assessment would be a good sample at this level of expectation. And is this might require models or samples. So there's that. So you can use a combination of teacher assessment, you can use peer assessment, self-assessment, but you're using criteria for which will be something of the language we use and we expect at this level, if I can keep today or this task or this test, then you have to success criteria. Now, as a crutch, there are other things you can do. You can go, for example, there are a number of projects English language as it's taught is to see it. And you can see what's typically learned for levels. For example, the British Council has what called core inventory to give you language courses, large, but it gives you millions on most schools at this level. It will give you the grammar points we're typically focused on in course books and courses this level. It will give you examples of vocabulary sets. It will give you lists of functional phrases which students tend to learn at these levels. So that's called core. So that's not a crutch, but that's very linguistic. And remember, that's only one part. So linguistic knowledge is only one part of the time.
I'd also like to this can be useful in I think question. Like we have something about that also.
To say that the CFR, knowledge the CFR, where it is, you have a standard set of standards that is across different languages. So regarding the and being according to the CFR, you will find there is parallelism across the standards that CFR has, the standards that are stated in the CFR and the curriculum standards that we have articulated in the meta curriculum guides. You find that if a child is effective learning, then assume confidence that child has at least the B2 and more effective. That's what achieving learning principles we have articulated in the guide. Then I suggest that we look at not the paper which discusses all of the theories of not just curriculum, also has delivered through pedagogy, but also our supporting appendices, which shows you that how you're going to deliver also.
Thank you so much. I don't think still for any more, but maybe we can take note of the questions and we'll see if we can address them. But at this point, allow me to award our certificate of appreciation to our resource person. So certificate of appreciation is given to Mr. Andy Milner for sharing valuable insights from teachers education and faculty of CFC or context English and multilingual. This is our voice today, October 8 via Zoom, and to be signed by me. And then, of course, the same will be given to Ms. Ayet for yours. Can we give them a big round of applause, a virtual clap or heart or something to show our appreciation? Thank you so much. And then please watch out for our next webinar. This time it's going to be focusing on higher education, and we'll have a with me again and Andy. That's going to be on November 12, 2025. So, have things to share?
Right, so a reminder, everyone, to complete the forms to receive our events. There's a few more webinar sessions we have this month in October in line with International Month Celebration. We have our English Global Focus, a series of webinars, October 9 to 11. Then we have our on 15th, on English Communication, and one on access to in our movement. There's an English language this year for online teacher tickets and sign workshop in Lagos and region hosted by CHMSU in November 27 and 28. Thank you.
Okay, please make sure to fill out the evaluation if you want. And also, let's have a picture. I think we can stop right now. All right.
Yes,
it's possible to take a picture of
just the
right.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Everyone join the next time.
Thank you po.